Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to today's 30-minute webinar on how to perfect your interview technique, including what is the STAR interview technique used commonly by clients. I'm Evelyn Zauchner. I'm the co-founder of Signature Recruitment and director of our London office. With me are Rachel Langley, Head of Projects and Delivery, who will share her recruitment experience and top interview tips in this webinar, as well as Victoria Walker, our Client Services Manager from our Bristol office. January is typically a popular time to be looking for a new role, and even with the current lockdown, we have already seen a lot of movement in the market over the last few days. Also, recent data from the Office of National Statistics confirms that employer confidence is on the rise, resulting in companies hiring and adding to their headcount. On this note, I will hand you over to Rachel, who has been with Signature for 7 years, having assisted hundreds and hundreds of candidates with interview preparation prior to an interview. In regards to the format, Rachel will share her expertise for about 20 to 25 minutes, leaving enough time at the end to answer any questions that may come up during the webinar. If you would like to ask Rachel anything, please just put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we would then answer them anonymously at the end. I also wanted to say a big thank you for attending and a big thank you for everyone for sending in so many great questions in advance. We're hoping to answer as many as possible of them today, but if there are any questions you may have afterwards, please reach out to Rachel, Victoria, or myself. So without further ado, I will hand you over to my colleague, Rachel.
Thanks, Evelyn. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I have helped thousands of candidates prepare for interviews, so I'm hoping to impart some of my experience with you guys today. I am experiencing my 8th January in recruitment this year, and it is shaping up to be, as it normally is the most popular time for people searching for a new role. So I hope that my guidance on interview preparation will help you with your recruitment activities in the new year. Let's begin. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about the preparation basics. I'm not here to tell you that you need to jump on the company website or anything like that. These are just some quick pointers for the generic parts of interview preparation that I'm sure we all already do. So the first is the company research that we all know we need to do, including the website. But what I wanted to give is a pointer here that in my experience working with candidates and interviewing quite a lot myself, I do find that quite a lot of people sit in interview and recite maybe a company history that they found on the website. And while that does the job of showing you have made the effort to go onto the website and do your research, sometimes it is much more attention grabbing to focus on a unique selling point for you from that website. So maybe you were most interested in a particular client that they work with, or a charity partner that they're involved in, or perhaps maybe one of their company values just really aligns with your own and you'd like to communicate that across in the interview. That should all be part as your company research will go down extremely well. As part of your research, I wanted to mention, please do check out the company social media accounts. As we know, social media is extremely important for business pretty much everywhere these days, and it will give you a great insight into company culture, if it's more casual account like Instagram, or a lot of their activities on LinkedIn, staff, etc. So check out those social media accounts. My next one is the focus on the job description in your interview preparation. So it's quite important that you are able to demonstrate your understanding of the day-to-day of the role and what will be expected of you duty-wise. And I think that my main tip for you here is being able to do that quite well basically releases time in the rest of the interview for you to talk about your skills, especially if you have an interview that's going to be about 30 to 45 minutes long. If you spend kind of 10 to 15 minutes discussing the job and what is expected within the role, and really that information should be on the job description, it eats into the time when you can display your skills and abilities. So they ask you, what do you know about this role, or what do you think the expectations of you will be? Try to be quite succinct there and release some time up to focus on what you bring to the table. The next part is, who are you meeting? So as part of your social media investigation, or if you're one of those types of people that can find out anything about anyone online, as we all know someone who can, is definitely a good skill to have on LinkedIn, because if you look at the people you are going to be meeting from the organization, you'll be able to see their employment background, so the types of industries that they themselves have worked in, what experience they've brought to the company. You might even see some common ground there that will help conversation, and actually just helps you feel a whole lot more comfortable going into an interview, having never met those people before, if you've seen them like a profile picture and where they've worked. So next, we did promise we would cover as many of your questions as possible within this webinar. So I'm going to cover some of them now. There'll be another section later, and then some time to discuss what might be coming through in Q&A or an email as well. So one of the first questions put forward was, what questions should I ask as an interviewee? So we all know, coming to the latter stages of any interview, you are asked if you have any questions. A lot of candidates tell me that, especially if they've been interviewing for an hour already, or perhaps even longer, or if it's a second stage, then a lot of their questions have been answered as you talk so much throughout the course of the interview. So I always try to prepare some questions for them to still be able to put forward and show their engagement. And actually the questions that I want to share with you at the moment is a good example of how you can open up the interview as a bit more of a two-way street. Yes, you are being interviewed for the job and your suitability, but you are also seeing if that is the place that you would enjoy working. So some good questions to kind of pass back to the interviewer is, why do you like working for the company? Especially if you know from your LinkedIn research they've been there for a long time, there must be something about that environmental culture or company that they really enjoy, and that'd be quite insightful for you. What are they looking for in an ideal candidate? So that will give you some further context around the whole recruitment process. You could even ask what the next steps would be, when you can hear from them next. I think that's perfectly reasonable, having spent your time in the interview. Also, maybe some more context about the recruitment process is why the piece of recruitment has come about. So if someone has received a promotion and they're now re-recruiting for the role, that's a really positive sign of the progression within the position that you could eventually end up in. So there's an example of some questions to put forward that will give you quite a lot of details about the company and the job role as well. The next question I was asked is, what in particular gives a bad impression in an interview? There are a few things, and they're usually quite small things that can happen, especially at a first interview stage, because you are essentially making a first impression, which, as we know, is always really quite important. So first of all, lateness is a big one. Please ensure that you're punctual for any interview, whether it's virtual or on site, because that can give an extremely negative first impression. Or I usually find that some things are really distracting to an interviewer within an interview process, and they can't quite focus on the skills that that person and the positive attributes of that person because of these distracting elements. So for example, walking into an interview that is quite formal, maybe it is a panel interview setup and it's going to be, you know, at least an hour long, and you walk in with kind of takeaway coffee or half drunken coffee, and that can quite commonly happen because people who want to allow some time to get to their location, settle and have a coffee, maybe settle and have the nerves, generally sometimes take that into the interview, but it can spark the notion that you're maybe taking it quite casually and in a formal interview setting that could give a slight bad impression. So those things are just little things to consider. But yes, being punctual and dressing correctly for a formal interview process, and maybe leave the takeaway coffee outside. One other thing I would want to mention there is in your answers, if you're asked about your previous employment, your previous companies or previous managers that you've worked with, please be quite diplomatic and professional in your response, as any bad mouthing of anywhere or anyone that you have worked with previously can give a bad impression as well. So they're my pointers for that one there. The next question is, how can I know what questions are going to come up in the interview? So you can't is the quick answer, but you can make an educated guess based on your preparation of the job description. You can be rest assured that it is a very high likelihood that any questions put forward to you are going to be based around the person specification section of a job description. So in there, they're going to be person specification, the skills and attributes of the person that they are looking for. And especially in competency-based interviews, we're going to talk about the STAR technique in this webinar. The scenario-based questions are going to be centered around those skills and attributes. So your preparation of the job description there is going to give you your insight into the questions that will come up. I just want to ask Evelyn if I have any other questions at this stage that I can help with.
Thank you, Rachel. We actually had a couple of questions emailed in the course of this webinar, so not via the Q&A section, but actually via email. So one of the questions is, will I be asked about any gaps on my CV in the interview? What would you say to that?
Yes, you could be. I mean, of course, an interviewer can ask anything they wish in an interview, and they might even ask you reasons for leaving your previous roles. Why did you move on? So yes, about gaps and your reasons for leaving the role. I mean, the advantage that you have being asked that in an interview setting is that you can prepare your answer. So all in the preparation, of course. So you can prepare how you would want to explain. Maybe you took a leave of absence to go traveling. You could explain where you went and what you got up to, if you did any volunteering during that time, and that'd be, demonstrating some other maybe skills and attributes there, and could be quite positive. And again, just referring back to, if you've got your reasons for leaving, just be quite professional and diplomatic in your reasons there. If it's for progression, for example, that's perfectly valid and okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rachel. We have another Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. So Rachel, I think maybe we should continue, and then if anybody else has any more questions, feel free to email them or put them in the Q&A section. I can see somebody already put a question there, so we're hoping to cover that towards the end as well.
No problem. Okay. So we're going to move on to talking about the STAR technique, as we had promised. The STAR technique is used by quite a lot of our clients, and it is a really common format for competency-based interviews used by organisations across the board. I found in my work with candidates that if we use the STAR technique to prepare, then even if your interview is not in the STAR technique format, you will actually have some quite thorough answers prepared, and that's always a positive for interviews. So that's definitely the reason why I wanted to include it in the webinar today. Now, what is the STAR technique? So it is essentially for, like I mentioned, competency-based interviews that are going to focus on your skills and abilities. The STAR technique is a structure that you can use for your answers to interview questions, and in particular they are scenario interview questions. If you put forward a scenario, what would you do in this instance, etc., then the STAR technique will really help you demonstrate your abilities well. So let's talk a little bit about the structure for the STAR technique. So S stands for situation and set the scene. So you want to give them quite a lot of context about a situation that you have been involved in one of your previous roles. So the what, the where, the why, the how is really important for the STAR technique. And in any interview, remember that the interviewer probably hasn't worked in the company that you've been in previously or been in that role. So to give quite a lot of context surrounding the situation that you found yourself in is really important to set the scene. The T stands for task. So what was required of you? Want to describe the task, especially if that involves time restrictions, deadlines, for example, or particular tasks for yourself for the team. Then give a whole picture of the task there. The approach would be specifically what you did. So even if it was a team task that you were involved in, you need to focus on the approach of what you yourself carried out in order to meet the requirements of that task. So that is the approach. And the results, so the outcome. We'd hope that you choose an example you have a positive outcome of where you completed those tasks to a high ability, to a high standard, sorry, with your ability, and have a well-rounded answer with your results. So I wanted to, now that we've covered the structure, give you an example, and we can see that in an answer to a question. So if I were to walk into an interview with my background being recruitment, I would more than likely be asked about recruitment processes that I myself have delivered on. So I'm going to give you an example that is going to be a scenario. So a scenario of I've been asked, please tell us about a time when you have completed a recruitment process within a set deadline. Now, that is a scenario-based question, and I imagine that the interviewer is asking me to demonstrate a competency of delivering at pace. So when have I delivered a recruitment process at pace? And here is my answer using the STAR technique. So my situation, I'm going to set the scene. In my most recent role, I was responsible for recruitment. Shortly after joining, there were 3 new positions that required recruitment to be completed within a short time period. And the task, it was important that the recruitment was completed from advertisement all the way through to onboarding within 1 month, so a 4-week time frame. This is because the recruits would support a project and that project needed to start on time. My approach. So I mapped out the process and I assigned internal deadlines to each stage of the recruitment process. I led weekly team meetings in order to keep up to date on progress and communicate effectively regarding interview and induction schedules to all the stakeholders involved. And the results of my approach were that all 3 recruitment processes were completed within the 4-week time frame, and the project was also successful. One of the new team members was offered a permanent position at the end of the project, which they were delighted with, and we got an excellent kind of new team member on a long-term basis. Okay, so that is my answer using the STAR technique for delivering a recruitment process at pace within a set time frame. I'm going to come back to some of your questions now that we've had a good run through of the STAR technique there. I hope that's easily implementable for you guys in your interview preparation. Some of the questions that you had for me were, should I discuss my future career plans if the position I'm applying for is not in line with my end career goal? This is actually a really good question, and I come across it quite a lot when we recruit for temporary positions. So the reason you might want a temporary role is because it meets a temporary need for you, and it might not be your, ideally desirable position for the next kind of 5 years, and that's perfectly okay. I think that if there is relevancy to the role that you are interviewing for, then certainly it would not hurt to demonstrate that you have ambition and drive to achieve a longer term career goal. I think that it's probably unlikely you might be asked about that if you're certainly interviewing for a short term position. But if it is a permanent role that you're applying for and it's not in an industry sector or in line with the end career goal, I would maybe explain why it fits with your plan right now. So you could say, my end career goal is X, Y, and Z. And although this position is not in that sector, what I will gain from it is this, this, and this. And what I will be able to develop within the position and give to the company is this, this, and this. So I hope that that makes sense in response to that question. So next question here is, I want to convey that I like to learn new skills, but will they think that I don't currently know how to carry out the duties of the role? So I would say it is a way to phrase what you're saying. So you want to convey that you want to learn new skills, and you want to phrase that in the correct way. And what I would say is that you need to choose your timing in displaying that you want to learn new skills as well. So if this is at the end of an interview and you have had time throughout that interview to demonstrate your skills and ability that is directly relevant for this position, maybe using the STAR technique, then at the end you can say, you know, what opportunity is there for learning and development? I'm really keen to learn new things, and that would make perfect sense. I think that if you are asked about your skills or ability, and in response to one of those questions you say that you want to learn new things, then in an interviewer's mind they might think that you want to learn on the job, and that might not be suitable for them from a training perspective. So think about when you are displaying that desire to learn new skills within the interview, and also how you phrased it. So although I have the skills and abilities of recruitment working to deadlines, I would also like to learn new skills as a constant development of myself, and I'd be keen to learn people management later down the line, for example. Okay. Will it be okay to refer to notes that I've made in my preparation within the interview? So I do get asked this quite a lot, actually, and then just straight off the bat I want to say that yes, it is perfectly okay to take notes or even take a copy of the CV or the job description into the interview, and it is perfectly okay to refer to those in the interview as well. I'd say if you could like it to, maybe if you go into a meeting with multiple people, and if you're in a meeting and they had notes that they had prepared for that meeting, it would demonstrate positive things rather than anything negative. It's exactly the same in an interview as well. It shows your preparation, shows that you want to communicate the correct things and articulate correctly. So it's perfectly okay to take your notes or documents with you. Evelyn, do you want me to cover any other questions at the moment?
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, we have quite a few questions coming in, so we hope to answer most of them. So a few have asked if we would send through the slides. Yes, we absolutely can. You will get a transcript of the whole webinar. I don't think on Zoom you can send an attachment. So if you actually want a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, just drop myself, Evelyn, or Rachel, or Victoria a call, and we can certainly send this over to you. So I think that answers a question for maybe 3 or 4. One of the questions is, if you have been in an organization for a long time with little career progression, is there a way to phrase this in a positive way so it doesn't look negative?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about the positive things that does demonstrate. It demonstrates commitment to the role. It demonstrates that you obviously knew that role extremely well and were relied upon to carry that out over a long period of time. So there are definitely positive aspects to having been have longevity in a position, and a lot of clients ask us for candidates who hold longevity in their roles. So you can certainly you know, some people might certainly think, well, okay, you didn't have progression, but that's not an absolute must. It's a very individual thing whether you want to move into a different role or, you know, into a different place, and that's a choice that an individual makes. So it's not you know, like a set rule for everybody. And think about the positive things that does convey that you have longevity there and have known that role very, very well.
Thank you, Rachel. God, there's so many questions. Let me think for maybe another one that might be interesting to the whole group. Do you have advice on how to refresh your memory on what your tasks were when employed? I have been unemployed for 2 months and 2 weeks, and when I'm in an interview, I sometimes forgot I had certain duties that would have been necessary to mention. I mean, I guess it might come back to preparation, Rachel, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Your preparation is the time to think through those tasks and have a variety of examples to use in the interview. I think that yeah, it's quite a lot of things that people experience, especially if you've had a very, very busy role. You sometimes forget, certain things that you did that because you undertook so much in a position. I think that for myself, I like to think logically. I think, okay, if I think back to that position and I started work at 9 o'clock in the morning, what did I carry out? Who did I speak to? What were my main tasks in the day? And then I think about my overall achievements. What were the big things that I'm really proud of? And that should give you quite a few examples to work from there. So if you wanted to try the kind of logical thinking approach and you're quite similar to myself, or if you still have access to maybe the job description from your previous job role, that might be helpful, or have access to maybe the company website or vacancy of what they worked with when you were in that position. That could maybe help.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Another question, we have a few questions actually in regards to the STAR technique. So somebody asked, in regards to when you actually answer those questions, do I need to give a heading like situation task within the scenario being described, or can we just talk about the scenario with fluidity without the headings?
I would certainly advise having quite a fluid answer. I think that it will be quite obvious to the interviewer, especially if they're following the STAR technique themselves, that you are providing a well-rounded answer using the STAR technique. So I definitely advise providing quite a fluid answer and response. If it helps you to remember, especially if you're feeling a little bit anxious for the interview, then you can phrase it in a way of, okay, so the situation I was involved in was, etc., and the task that I needed to carry out was, and that might give you some little cues to remember your full prepared example.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Another question around the STAR technique is like when you actually use it within the interview, so you know that the interviewee is using it, and obviously you've prepped for it. Like, how would you go through it without sounding too rehearsed? And how much time would you spend on each response?
Yeah, I would say an easy way to make it more natural and part of your more natural conversation is to have some mock run-throughs. I always advise my candidates to speak with people they trust. So if you have a partner or your parents or a sibling or a close friend or someone you live with who has a time, even just kind of 15 minutes, 20 minutes to sit down and do a couple of mock run-throughs with you, that will help you say it in a more natural way. I would say that if it does sound rehearsed, it's still the actual content that you're getting across that is the important thing, and is the kind of example and the outcomes and the skills and abilities that you demonstrate that is the most important thing within the interview. Again, it's not a negative thing to demonstrate that you are well prepared and that you have prepared answers, as long as your content is relevant from the work that you have done.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I'm mindful of time, but if you're okay, Rachel, I'll ask a few more questions for your advice, if that would be okay. Somebody asked, best way to handle short-term contracts or loads of short-term roles when looking for a more permanent role. What would you recommend?
I would say you could give your reason as to why that contract was suitable for you at that time. A lot of short-term contracts have a specific reason why it was that length. So maybe you covered someone's maternity leave, for example, or maybe it was a set contract time because it was for that specific project, and then you successfully complete the project, the contract comes to an end. And that's a nice way of explaining why it was that time period for those roles. I think that if you're trying to talk about multiple positions, you might want to kind of group them if the skills and abilities you demonstrated within those roles were quite similar. And again, the most important thing is the skills and abilities. And remember that a competency-based interview is not about kind of the length of time that you spent within the position. It's about your ability and what you carried out when you were there.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Another question is, do you have any tips or advice on how to control interview nerves? I think we've all been there, gone for an interview for a role that you really want, and sometimes nerves, take over a little bit.
Yeah, I think everybody experiences that. If you don't, you're very, very lucky. But if you do, don't worry, it's quite common. And I think that is actually not a negative thing to have nerves. If you want to do well and you want the job role, that's a nice thing that they should recognize. If you're nervous to represent yourself well for the role, I actually put a quick slide together for interview nerves. And these, again, just pointers that I found have worked really, really well when I work with my candidates ahead of interviews. So it's a stay hydrated and limit your caffeine intake. If you have multiple coffees before going into an interview and you're quite nervous, might seem a little bit wired at that time, and maybe swap those coffees for a water, and that will actually help you bring the anxiety level down a little bit. And again, like we talked about, you want to be punctual anyway, but if you allow time, then your journey to the site is not going to be very stressful, or allow time to set your virtual setup and your tech up correctly, and then that's something you do not need to worry about. You can then just give yourself a breather before starting the interview. And again, we mentioned, is it okay to have notes to hand? And I think that having notes to hand might actually lessen the pressure of memorizing those prepared answers or memorizing everything that you think you need to convey your skills and abilities. So having the notes to hand might lessen the pressure for you a little bit there.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Do we have another question? This is in regards to salary. What is the best way to deal with a salary question? I usually round up my leaving salary and would like to increase my new salary. What's the best way to go about that, Rachel?
I'm getting from that question that you wanting to take a step up in your salary in your next role, and I think that is quite a natural progression to want to do that, and it's quite a common thing that people want to take a step up in their next position. And I think that as long as it's a salary that is relevant to the responsibility level of the role and it's market value for the position, there's nothing wrong with asking for that salary either. I think that if you are asked about your previous salary levels, then yes, you can round up to a total salary if you so wish, but you could also explain, if your last role, for example, was a temporary position and you took that because it just met a need at the time, then explain that and say, my last position was on X salary. I actually took that at that level because it was a 3-month contract and I needed that before I went on my travels, and it fit in quite perfectly. However, the type of role that I'm looking for now is going to be at this level, and therefore my salary expectation is this.
Great.
I hope that's right for the scenario they're looking for.
Great, thank you, Rachel. I'm quite mindful that obviously you guys are committing to this time on this webinar. I might go through one more question. I can see that most of the attendees are still online. So I'm thinking, if it's okay with Rachel, I might do 1 or 2 more questions. One of the questions is do you think, Rachel, there's anything in particular you should avoid saying in an interview? Anything you should try and stay away from?
I think that there's nothing in particular I would avoid staying away from. I generally advise candidates that if you are in a first interview stage, it's generally not the time to maybe discuss salary or benefits or maybe a specific flexible working pattern that you are looking for. I think that they are perfectly valid things to discuss, but it's maybe not for the time that you need to demonstrate your skills and abilities. It might be best to pop those questions across to the person who organises the interview. Is usually a really good person to pose those kinds of questions to. And again, just quite keen for you to not distract away from anything that might secure you the role within that first interview setting. So it might be best to have your first interview, and then afterwards, when you maybe send a message to thank people for their time, ask for a call and say, do you have some time for me to ask you some things in regards to working hours, etc.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And then I think we do a final question. Somebody asked, how far is it too far when emphasizing how much you want the position? I mean, I believe, I think, Rachel, I'm sure you can cover how to end the interview, as you leave, to maybe emphasize it there. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Rachel?
I think you'd be quite hard pressed to take it too far, to be honest. I think that when I interview people myself, I want to give a good impression of the company and why I enjoy working there and why I've enjoyed working there for so long. So if someone wants to kind of reciprocate that, to say that they're quite enthusiastic to join us and they really kind of desire the job and desire to work for the company, I kind of think that that's part of my job done. It's quite a good thing. So and obviously from an interview stage, when they are considering candidates, they do want to feel from their perspective that that candidate is engaged, is interested, especially if there's going to be a next stage after that. Maybe you only at a first stage, there's going to be a second interview. So I would say definitely convey your enthusiasm for the role, definitely convey that it's something that you want to go into, and it can't be misconstrued in a negative way at all.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And then somebody asked at the very beginning of the webinar, I had a corporate interview once where the CEO sat in unexpectedly and asked me if I had any questions at the start. Threw me. Yes, of course I had loads, but I was going to pick the relevant ones at the end. So what you have done. I'm quite happy actually to answer that, Rachel. I think we have all seen or on TV, or you hear of those stories where companies ask weird and wonderful questions. How many light bulbs are there in London, and so on. So I think sometimes, it is, I think, a bit unexpected how far companies will go with the interview technique. I mean, in that specific scenario, I would actually have been quite upfront and said that you would ask the question towards the end. This is the beginning of the interview. I wouldn't really, if there was myself and somebody, and I would say that to a candidate, I wouldn't see where I was going with this question. It's the beginning of an interview. Maybe they were just testing how quick you were, in giving, thinking on your feet and giving a response. But hopefully that has answered most of your questions. I think there are still quite a few that we haven't answered. So you're really very welcome to reach out to myself, Rachel, or Victoria if you want a specific answer to the questions that you have. I'm going to hand over to Victoria briefly. But yeah, the webinar will be sent to you. And if you want a copy of the slides, again, just email us and we'd be happy to share that with you as well. But thank you so much, Rachel. But yeah, over to you, Victoria.
Thanks, Evelyn. Yeah, thanks, Rachel, for sharing your expertise and tips with us over the last half an hour. I think it's especially useful in the current climate as the job market is really starting to pick up. Thank you as well to all our attendees for joining us today and for so many excellent questions. We hope you all found this really useful and have been taking lots of notes to take away and implement as well. Do keep in touch with us. For any additional tips and advice, please do follow us on Instagram. And as we mentioned, if you have any questions for Rachel, Evelyn or I, our contact details on the screen and also on the link for the initial webinar email that was sent to you as well. We're really busy with vacancies at Signature at the moment. So if you are looking for a new role at the moment, do head over to our website for further details on all of our current vacancies where you'll be able to make an application as well. And with that, have a great afternoon and we look forward to catching up with you all in the near future.
Thank you. Bye.